I'm an interaction designer and a digital luthier. Well, that means that I'm building musical instruments and, well, I'm trying to make kind of unusual interfaces for that. So that's why I'm going to take you on a quick ride through the history of musical instrument design, and that actually starts quite a long time ago. So our ancestors already built instruments from their bows, from bones, and with the hammers. So they discovered the principles of percussion, of plucked strings, and also of flutes, even discrete notes when they were drilling holes into their bones. So actually this flute you're seeing here has been found near Slovenia and is dated back for 35,000 years. So if you look now on our musical instruments from today, at least the acoustic musical instruments, they are actually built on the same principles still. So we have string instruments, we have tube instruments, and we have percussion instruments. So we have membranes vibrating, we have strings vibrating, and air tubes vibrating. So actually, in the end of the 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century, people were starting to be a bit unhappy about this situation because everything was quite limited by physics. So if you wanted to have a small instrument, and it had automatically a high pitch, for example, so you could not change that. Physics defined the pitch and the timbre of any instrument you were building. So Italian futurist Luigi Russolo, he actually built quite interesting devices, kind of acoustic synthesizers for noise sounds. We called them intorno rumori. That also marked a bit the end of acoustic possibilities of instrument designs. Well, lucky enough, roughly by the same time, we had inventors who invented electronic music. And guess when that happened? So that happened 135 years ago. In 1875, Elisha Gray invented the musical telegraph. He basically invented the oscillator, the basic element of electroacoustic music, and he hooked it up to a little keyboard, and what you have is a basic synthesizer. Some of you might know Leon Theremin, who invented a musical instrument named after him, the theremin, who had also a quite unusual interface. He had two antennas, and by moving your hands next to those antennas, you could actually change the pitch and the loudness of a simple oscillating sound. It's quite interesting because it's a quite difficult instrument, and people are still learning it nowadays. It's one of the most successful early musical instruments from the 1920s. Actually, Lenin was even playing on that instrument already. Then things went quite quickly. Engineers and scientists developed more musical instruments. They improved the techniques, the circuits behind the designs. Okay, well, a sound problem, that's interesting in that context. Well, they improved the designs and made better synthesizers. So what you see here is the Trautonium by German inventor Trautwein. And in the 1930s, also composers and musicians started to work with those instruments. So suddenly they were picked up by culture. We had movies. Hindemith was actually composing for the Trautonium as well. And then things were getting faster and faster, and so my ride through history of electronic music is also getting a bit faster. We had commercialization of electronic musical instruments. We had Bob Moog, who brought the synthesizer to the masses. We had the modular synthesizer, which before then was only in a very academic thing and only available for specialists and engineers and in research labs. Suddenly it got into the hands of musicians. And Wendy Carlos, for example, musicians in the late 1960s, she recorded the famous album Switched on Bach, recording Bach songs on the synthesizer. And you might know the music, the soundtrack from Clockwork Orange. It's that early synthesizer music from that time. So again, things went quickly, and it was picked up by culture, popular culture. Kraftwerk is a topic here, we would say, picking up synthesizer sounds in popular music in general cultural practice. So then we had to switch from the analog times to the digital times. So in the 70s and 80s, people started to make sounds not only with analog circuitry, but made it with digital computers. A pioneer in that area is Max Matthews. He already did that in the 1950s, but in the 1950s, you can imagine the computers were kind of big animals, and it was quite difficult to operate them, and it was also not in real time. So when you recorded a sound there, it took a weekend to get the results. So in the 70s, 80s, we had suddenly synthesizers like the DX7 from Yamaha, which also brought again digital sound synthesis to the masses, and again, popular music was picking up quite happily. By the end of the 80s, we also had personal computers suddenly being capable of doing real-time computing of sound. So This next station you see on the slides here was one of the first machines which was capable of doing digital signal processing, and suddenly we could take a computer and have the unlimited universe of sounds, just depending on the software we were using to generate those sounds. No? So it became kind of a universal musical instrument in the computer. And we had also new software elements like Max MSP, which is actually named after Max Matthews, that pioneer of digital music, brought these new paradigms of visual programming for sound. I guess many of you might have tried that already. So, but again, what you see here, although we are in the digital domain already, we're using computer to make sounds, we have still the early paradigms here, like the modular synthesizer, still embedded into those graphical programming languages. So, and this is where we are today. We're using a computer as a musical instrument. Who didn't see already a musician on stage with a laptop making music? It's not a very engaging experience. You see somebody having a bit of faint light in his face. He could do anything. He could play MP3 files. He could browse the web and just entertain himself, and you can't really tell what he's doing. It's not very engaging. At the same time, it's also not very engaging for the musician because this device is an office tool. It has been developed for actually surfing the web and replaying MP3 files and writing text, etc., etc. So it has not been designed for that. It's just a universal tool. It's capable, it's cheap, and you can run music software in it. But there's a big problem on it. It has a keyboard and a mouse, and we want to get rid of that because that's not the right expressive device to make music. I think you all agree with that, no? So the big question is now, we have those synthesizers, they're really complicated. They have like this unlimited universe of possible sounds. So you can imagine all those knobs and cables on that synthesizer being, let's say, control points where you change and manage these sound timbres and their appearance in general. But then you need to kind of find a way how to control this universe. And what people did, they plugged in traditional instrument controllers, like again a piano keyboard, for example, in order to make music with those synthesizers. This happened not only with MIDI, which is the common standard nowadays for, well, since 20, 30 years already, for connecting synthesizers to controllers. So actually this idea already had been invented with the pipe organ or with the piano in general, to have this sound generating body on one side and this controlling interface on the other side. So nowadays what people are doing, since they're not very happy with making music on the laptops, they just buy ready-made controller devices, and those controller devices allow you to play a little bit on the piano, touch a few knobs and touch a few buttons in order to control your software. But still, you're kind of using it like a remote control for your computer, basically. So like me doing the switching of the slides with my remote control here, okay, going back and forth. I actually have to go back now again. I'm remote controlling those synthesizers. And it's not really like playing an instrument, it's like operating a remote control, for me at least. So again, people design their remote controls like this wind controller. If you know already how to play the clarinet, why not plug in a kind of wind controller, clarinet controller into your computer? So others are having those knobs and sliders just to physically control the parameters they need. And others, they make more experimental DIY designs like the Monome, which is quite popular nowadays as well. So people start to build their own controllers for their own music, so their own remote controls for their own styles. So, but if you look at the traditional acoustic musical instrument, that's a different thing. Those devices have input, sound generation, and output, which is sound, but also more than that. It's vibration. You feel the instrument vibrating. You can see the strings vibrating on the device. So it's everything within a single artifact. So kind of with this separation of control and sound generation, which we had in the last years, we kind of lost the part. We don't have this musical instrument as an artifact anymore. So if we look around in our physical world and see what else do we have which operates that way, everything basically. So we have that abacus. So we move the beats on that abacus, we arrange the numbers, the abacus implicitly calculates the results, and you can read them again from those beats. So it's input, calculation, and output again in this physical device. So if you look at the chess game, we have these symbolic figures which only in the surroundings, on the top of the chessboard, they suddenly get their meaning, they get the rule set attached to them. Outside of that world, they're not functioning. But on the chessboard, a definite rule set is defining their life, basically. If you look at the shaker, if we're making a cocktail, we can pour things into that cocktail shaker. We can kind of manipulate using hand gestures. We can change the content, we can operate on that content. And if we take this piece of clay, we can shape our physical world with our bare hands. And wouldn't it be great to shape sound, kind of, with our bare hands? Having a piece of clay that sounds. So that was the idea which we took with the design of our musical instruments. So how can we use those things we know from everyday life? How can we use that and make it digital? And how can we employ it into the design of musical instruments? So actually this brought us to the design of the Reactable, which is a tangible modular synthesizer, very much based on the early ideas of modular synthesizers like Björk synthesizers. But we created a new interface for that, which was very much inspired from those early ideas of tangible physical objects, which we are manipulating to make sound. So maybe I should show a quick video for a minute, just to get an idea how this instrument looks like. I hope that gave you a quick impression how the instrument actually looks like. You can see it's a round table with some objects distributed on the surface, and those objects actually allow you to make and build sound and to build music on that table surface. I guess some people may be ranting now on Twitter saying that that might be the product from a company from Redmond. I need to mention it has been done 2005 already. We had the first concert that time, and since then we have been constantly developing that instrument already. So what are the ingredients? We have modular synthesizers, we have visual feedback, like an oscilloscope for sound. We have those graphical visual programming language, which we turned into the tangible domain using simple blocks. And we place those blocks on this interactive surface, which actually gives those blocks their meaning, and by relating them and by arranging them, we can generate sound. So one basic idea was also, and I mentioned it before with the laptop, that we have visual feedback. So we have not only visual feedback on the table for the musicians, so we know and understand visually how the instrument is working. We also provide that same image to the audience, so they actually can follow and actually understand what the musician is doing at that moment. So in this case, we kind of eliminated the VJ, which has become necessary back then when people were just playing with the laptops on stage. Another design issue we had here, we wanted to make a collaborative instrument. So that's why we chose this metaphor of a round table. So that's a place where we meet, that's a place where we discuss, where we collaborate. So that's why it's round. There's no preferred side, no up and down, left and right. Any place has the same axis. Actually, you're seeing here Carlos Lopez, one of the best reactable players. We wanted to make this interface as easy as possible for the beginner. That means that you don't need to force your children to learn the piano for 15 years to be more or less capable to play a decent song. So we want to have an instrument which is intuitive for beginners, but also kind of useful for professional musicians. So we collaborated with Björk since 2007, and they have been actually playing 4 to 5 songs from their already produced album with the Reactable on the big stage. So it is a serious instrument, it's not a musical toy, as you might have thought from the first images with the children. So the basic idea behind the Reactable is now having this tangible sound program languages with those blocks on the surface. So I give you a quick insight maybe on the technical background for the instrument. So what you see here is those blocks. They are recognized by camera projection system, which is mounted underneath the table, so the camera sees what's happening there. You're moving the blocks, and those blocks have different meanings. They can be sound generators, they can be filters, they can be controllers, and by just combining, for example, an oscillator with a filter and with an LFO, which is a controlling component, you can shape sound and music by that way, in a very intuitive and nice way. Like I call it like a Lego for sound in the end. So those blocks, the cubes, are sample players, for example. The little squares are oscillators. It's a component we already know from Elisha Gray's musical telegraph 130 years ago. And then we have all those round and star objects which have different functions. Actually, one issue we had with the design of that instrument was also that when we started, we knew quite well what we want. So we had this very clear idea that we want to make this music instrument for electronic music, which just overcomes all those limitations we had which we lost on the one side from acoustic musical instruments and those limitations we had now from the digital controllers. So we knew that, but we didn't have the device to make it. So we didn't have the technology to make it. So, but I think in the end, it was a very good starting point for us because we didn't let us drive by technology. We didn't think, okay, we have this table, let's do something for it or something like that. We didn't also say, oh, we don't know how to do that, we don't even start. So we just tried to make it as good as possible in a way that it meets our expectations, but only then we started to build it, and then we had to solve the problems how to build it. And for that, we developed a software, we call it Reactivision, and that's something we even published, since it was a research project by a university. We even published that software so other people could also use that software to build their own interactive tables. So since then, hundreds of people have picked it up and used our symbols. We call them amoebas for an obvious reason. You stick them on any object, and you can track it with a camera. So that's how it looks like from underneath the table. You see the objects, and you see the fingers, and like that, you can make your own instrument or whatever you want, or any interactive application anyway, on an interactive surface. So another side project, and maybe the guys from the Table Connect team might be using that, is the Tuyo framework, which is now another open source framework, which we developed for multi-touch application. That's a term which is quite popular nowadays by the iPhone and everything, but it hasn't been that useful, that much used back then. So we were using it not at all for any sophisticated gestures, so we were mostly interested in the multi-user feature of multi-touch. So multi-touch by itself is not very exciting. If you moved and resized a few photos on the big screen, then you're satisfied already. So what is good about it is actually multi-user, that more than one person can work on the same environment. That's quite exciting about that point. Well, so that was for the open source technology we developed, but we also actually, now we're going to the shopping channel. If you're not wanting to build yourself, you can also buy one of our tables. So after all those university years, we had a lot of people asking, okay, can we have the table? And we just had a few research prototypes. We just had a few tables we gave to musicians, which we were collaborating with. But after a few years, actually 2 years ago, we formed the company Reactable.com, where we're now building the instrument for the stage. And those of you who can't afford the big one, you can also get the small pocket version of it. You can have it for the iPhone, and just those days we have actually the half-price version of it online, and you can have it for the iPad, for the iPhone, and Android, etc. So it's actually worth a try if you want to have it. Last but not least, I want to mention my colleagues. We developed this project in Spain, in Barcelona. Those lucky guys are still there in sunny Barcelona. I'm now back in Linz at the art school. So Marcos Alonso, Günther Geiger, and Sergio Schroeder are my companions, which we were developing together in Barcelona. I'm now in Linz at the art school. We are running a small interactive arts master program, which is quite internationally oriented. So if you're interested in that, if you want to work on new interface designs and want to study in a master program, come to us, to Linz. Interactive arts interface design is our business. Actually, we're having a small exhibition outside where you can see the React table, where you can see a few works from our students. So come by after the talks, and I will be happy to show you around. Thank you.